It was a quiet morning in the small town of Willow Creek, a place where everyone knew everyone else, and the streets were lined with neat houses, flowering yards, and the occasional dog trotting beside its owner. The sun had barely climbed above the rooftops when a buzz of unusual activity began to ripple through the town. The courthouse, a brick building with tall columns and wide steps, stood at the center of Main Street, looking dignified yet familiar, a place that had seen decades of local disputes, minor criminal cases, and community gatherings. Today, though, it was different. Inside the courthouse, the usual calm had been replaced by a hum of nervous whispers. Jurors shifted in their seats, police officers straightened their uniforms, and reporters fidgeted with cameras and notebooks. Something serious was about to unfold. The case at hand was a theft that had escalated beyond ordinary circumstances. It involved a suspect accused not only of stealing from a local convenience store, but also of behavior that endangered the town's children in subtle ways. For Willow Creek, a town that had never really known fear on this scale, the case had drawn a crowd. Amid the adults' stern faces and the murmurs of gossip, there was a small figure sitting quietly on her mother's lap, a little girl, no more than 3 years old, with wide brown eyes that seemed too aware for someone so tiny. Her tiny fingers clutched her mother's hand, her legs dangling above the floor, swinging slightly as she tried to make sense of the large, imposing room around her. She had been brought here not as a witness, not as a victim, but as a symbol of the innocents indirectly affected by the crime. The girl's mother, a woman in her late 20s with gentle eyes and a calm demeanor, whispered reassurances. "It's okay, honey. Just watch," she said, brushing the little girl's soft curls from her forehead. The girl's small nod suggested that she understood more than anyone in the room suspected. Around them, the courtroom felt tense, heavy with anticipation. Lawyers were reviewing notes, the judge's gavel gleamed ominously on the bench, and the gallery was crowded with townsfolk who had come to witness justice, or perhaps to witness the unexpected. Whispers traveled faster than sound. "Did you see the girl? So small, yet she's here. I heard the officers say a K-9 will be present. I can't imagine why a toddler would be part of this trial." Every eye seemed to flicker toward the tiny figure, wondering what part she would play. Most assumed she would remain quiet, an observer in a world of law and procedure that she could barely understand. But there was an air of expectation, unspoken yet palpable. Some people called it intuition, others called it fate. Even the officers, hardened by years of crime scenes and investigations, couldn't shake the feeling that something remarkable was about to happen. The courtroom doors opened and the judge entered, robes sweeping the floor with a quiet authority. Silence fell immediately. The gavel struck, a sharp echo bouncing off the high ceilings. "Court is now in session," the judge announced, his voice carrying weight, and yet beneath it lay a note of curiosity. He glanced toward the small girl in her mother's arms, raising an eyebrow ever so slightly, perhaps questioning what a child so young could contribute to the proceedings. At that moment, a slight rustle near the doorway drew attention. All heads turned to see a large, disciplined German shepherd being led by a uniformed handler. The dog's coat gleamed in the morning light filtering through the tall windows. His ears pricked up, alert and attentive, yet there was a calmness in his eyes that spoke of intelligence, training, and an almost human understanding of the room. This was Rex, a police dog known in Willow Creek for his service in law enforcement, sniffing out stolen goods, tracking suspects, and protecting civilians in dangerous situations. Today, however, his role was slightly different. The little girl's eyes widened as she caught sight of Rex. She had seen dogs before, of course, but this one was larger, more commanding, yet his gaze seemed almost gentle. Her fingers twitched in anticipation, and her mother leaned closer, whispering softly, "Go ahead, sweetie. Look at him." The girl's gaze never wavered. As Rex settled in the designated spot beside the handler, he scanned the room, nostrils flaring lightly as if sensing the energy around him. The audience watched in quiet fascination. Even the suspect, a man in his 30s with a weary expression and nervous hands, felt a shiver run down his spine. Dogs had a way of reading fear, of sensing truth in ways humans often could not. Rex's presence was both intimidating and oddly comforting. The courtroom staff prepared for the day's testimonies. Evidence files were organized, witnesses whispered last-minute recollections, and the jury leaned forward, ready for details that would determine the course of justice. Yet all the while, the tiny girl in the front row remained a silent observer. Her gaze kept drifting back to Rex, following his every move with the kind of attention that suggested understanding far beyond her years. Moments passed, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. There was a rhythm to the tension, the quiet ticking of the clock, the occasional cough, the scratch of a pen, and then a subtle shift. The child, tiny and unassuming, leaned slightly toward Rex, her eyes wide, lips parted in awe. Something about her attention brought a softness to the room, a reminder that innocence could exist even amid the serious gravity of law. No one could have predicted what would happen next. The courtroom was about to witness a moment that would be remembered not for the details of theft or legal arguments, but for the pure, unfiltered wisdom of a 3-year-old girl and the silent, unwavering presence of a police dog. In that quiet, crowded courtroom, before a single word had been exchanged, a connection had been formed, a connection that would soon stop the room in awe. The judge glanced over the top of his glasses at the little girl. "Are you ready to participate?" he asked gently, not knowing what to expect. The girl nodded shyly, gripping her mother's hand a little tighter. The air seemed to thrum with anticipation. Everyone, from the officers to the jury to the reporters with cameras poised, felt it, an intangible sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. And in that moment, Willow Creek held its breath. The courtroom held its collective breath as the large German shepherd, Rex, padded in beside his handler. The polished floor reflected the morning sunlight, and every step Rex took seemed deliberate, purposeful, yet calm. The dog's coat gleamed golden brown with streaks of black, each hair perfectly groomed, a testament to his disciplined training. His amber eyes scanned the room, analyzing every movement. The judge's steady gaze, the juror's tense posture, the suspect's jittering hands, and most importantly, the tiny figure of the girl in the front row. The little girl's eyes widened to twice their usual size. She had seen dogs before in parks, on television, and in pictures, but none like Rex. He was massive compared to the small terriers and beagles she was used to, yet there was an unmistakable gentleness in the way he carried himself. She tilted her head slightly, curiosity battling a small flicker of apprehension. Her mother whispered softly, "It's okay, honey, look at him, he's friendly." Rex approached slowly, guided by his handler, a tall, muscular man with years of law enforcement experience etched into his posture. The handler knelt, bringing himself closer to the child's level without rushing the dog. He knew Rex's temperament better than anyone. "He's a good boy and he knows you're safe," the handler murmured, softly enough that only the girl could hear. Rex sniffed the air, nostrils flaring slightly, then took a cautious step toward her. The courtroom seemed to pause. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, curious about the interaction. Journalists clicked their cameras silently, careful not to disturb the unfolding moment. The girl stretched her tiny hand forward, trembling just slightly. Rex lowered his head, ears softening, and nuzzled her hand with a gentle touch. The child giggled, a sound so delicate, it seemed to ripple through the room, momentarily cutting the tension. The observers couldn't help but notice. The hardened officers exchanged glances. One whispered, "She's fearless," or maybe he knows she's safe. Even the suspect's eyes flicked toward the scene, and for a moment his scowl softened into reluctant curiosity. Rex had a way of making even the most stoic humans pause, sensing emotions invisible to the eye. As the girl ran her fingers through the dog's thick fur, a sense of calm settled over the courtroom. The tension, heavy moments before, began to dissipate. The prosecution and defense exchanged subtle glances, the judges scribbled notes, but all were distracted by the bond forming before them. The child's innocence, combined with Rex's measured, intelligent presence, created an atmosphere that felt surreal, like a quiet sanctuary in the middle of legal proceedings. The handler spoke quietly to the girl's mother. Rex responds to children differently. He can sense fear, danger, and curiosity. Right now, he knows she's safe and he's being gentle. The mother nodded, eyes glistening. She had feared the courtroom would be overwhelming with its formalities, loud voices, and the unyielding seriousness of law. Instead, she found her daughter's presence magnified by Rex's calm demeanor, turning a tense courtroom into a space where empathy could flourish. The little girl, emboldened by Rex's gentle nudge, whispered, "Hi, doggy." It was a small phrase, barely audible, but it carried weight in the hushed room. The jurors smiled quietly, officers softened, and the reporter nearest to the front scribbled furiously. Cameras flashed discreetly, capturing the extraordinary connection forming between a toddler and a trained police dog. Rex sat obediently beside the girl now, his head tilted slightly as if listening to her. The handler knelt near them, whispering instructions to ensure the interaction remained safe. Let him sniff, let him approach. He'll respond if she's comfortable. And the girl, sensing an unspoken invitation, began to reach out with both hands, patting the dog gently. The sound of her laughter mingled with the faint rustle of papers and the distant hum of the courthouse's ventilation system, creating a rhythm that softened the formality of the room. As the trial preparations continued, other courtroom participants started to reflect on the unusual dynamic. Witnesses shuffled in and out, some glancing toward the girl and Rex with curiosity. The judge, a stern man who had presided over countless cases, could not help but smile beneath his robes, acknowledging that this was not a usual courtroom sight. The defense attorney, usually reserved and calculating, seemed momentarily distracted by the bond forming, perhaps realizing that the jury's attention might subtly shift to the innocence of the child rather than the severity of the crime. Rex, trained for years to detect threats and assist officers in tense situations, had instinctively responded to the child's presence. His movements were controlled, deliberate, yet there was warmth in his gaze. He had met many people in his career, but children were different, smaller, unpredictable, and often more honest in their emotions. He sensed no danger, only curiosity, and he mirrored it back to her in the gentlest way. For the little girl, the moment was magical. She had felt nervous upon entering the courthouse, the air heavy with adult expectations and the unknown. But here, with Rex by her side, she discovered a sense of courage. Her small hands explored his fur, her laughter rang out, and for a few minutes the courtroom became a place where tension and fear were replaced by connection and trust. The townspeople in the gallery leaned forward. They had come expecting a formal legal proceeding, but instead witnessed a subtle miracle, a tiny human being and a dog bridging gaps that words alone could not. Even the reporters paused their note-taking, absorbing the scene and realizing that this would become the story of the day, not the crime, not the verdict, but the extraordinary bond between innocence and protection. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours as the girl continued to interact with Rex. Her mother encouraged her softly, whispering that everything was fine, while the handler monitored the dog's responses carefully. The room was filled with a quiet reverence, a recognition that something special was occurring. And though the trial had not yet officially begun, the audience understood that this moment, the child's fearless interaction with a police dog, was already leaving a mark on everyone present. Then, as if on cue, the little girl leaned closer, resting her tiny forehead against Rex's shoulder. The dog, patient and attentive, shifted slightly, allowing her a gentle nuzzle in return. The scene was a perfect juxtaposition, the innocence of a child meeting the discipline and intelligence of a trained law enforcement dog. It was a moment that captured both hearts and minds, reminding everyone that courage and trust could exist in the smallest forms. By the time the recess ended and the courtroom prepared to officially start testimonies, the atmosphere had shifted. The once tense room now carried an undercurrent of warmth and awe. Officers straightened their uniforms with renewed purpose. Jurors leaned in with curiosity rather than apprehension, and even the suspect seemed momentarily disarmed by the simple, powerful connection unfolding in front of him. The judge rapped his gavel lightly. "Let's proceed," he said, but his voice held a softer tone than before. The little girl, now calm and confident, took her mother's hand, looking back once at Rex. The dog responded with a subtle wag of his tail, eyes gleaming. In that fleeting interaction, an unspoken promise had been made: protection, understanding, and a silent bond that would carry through the day's proceedings. No one in the courtroom realized yet that this simple, quiet connection between a 3-year-old and a police dog would soon culminate in words that would leave the entire room in awe, changing how everyone thought about courage, innocence, and the power of trust. But at that moment, everyone felt the magic, a delicate, unspoken anticipation of the extraordinary that was about to unfold. The courtroom settled as the judge called the session to order once again, the gavel echoing sharply off the tall, wooden walls. The ambient murmur of whispers faded to an attentive hush, with every eye focused on the proceedings. The small girl clutched her mother's hand tightly, her tiny fingers intertwined with hers. She had grown calmer after her brief encounter with Rex, yet her wide brown eyes darted occasionally to the dog, who remained a steadfast presence at the front of the room. The tension was palpable, the kind that made even seasoned courtroom reporters pause and adjust their pens. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Carter, rose, organizing her notes with meticulous precision. Her voice, though professional, carried the weight of urgency. "Members of the jury," she began, "we are here to discuss a case that is not merely about stolen property. It is about the safety of our community and, most importantly, about the children who were affected indirectly by these actions." She gestured toward the girl, and though no words were exchanged with her directly, the child instinctively leaned closer to her mother, as if understanding the significance of the moment. The evidence presentation was methodical. Photographs of the crime scene were projected onto a screen, capturing every angle of the small convenience store that had been broken into weeks earlier. Footage from security cameras showed the suspect, a man in his mid-30s with a nervous demeanor, removing items hastily and attempting to evade detection. The police dog Rex was featured prominently in the footage. Alert, disciplined, and ultimately instrumental in helping officers recover the stolen items. The jurors observed closely, some whispering to one another about the efficiency and intelligence of K-9 units in law enforcement. The girl's gaze, however, remained focused on Rex rather than the screen. She tilted her head thoughtfully, watching how he had acted with precision and bravery. Her tiny hands pressed against her mother's arm in silent fascination. To her, it was more than evidence. It was a display of trust and protection. Each time Rex appeared in the footage, she nodded slightly, as though acknowledging his role and perhaps forming the beginnings of understanding about what it meant to be courageous. Next, the prosecution called the girl's mother to testify. She spoke softly, recounting the days following the theft. "We didn't know what had happened at first," she explained, voice trembling slightly. "We just knew that our daughter had sensed something wrong. She would ask questions, but in her own way, showing us worry we hadn't noticed before. It was subtle, but she noticed fear. She noticed tension." Her words drew glances from the jury and the audience alike. They could sense the depth of observation in a child so young, and the mention of Rex drew a few knowing smiles from the officers present. The defense attorney, a tall man named Robert Hayes, rose carefully. His approach was deliberate. He knew that controlling the courtroom's perception was crucial. "Let's not forget," he said calmly, "that this is a minor theft. There was no direct harm to anyone. While we respect the work of law enforcement, we must separate adult decisions from innocent observation. A 3-year-old's perception, while endearing, is not evidence." Yet even as he spoke, his eyes flicked to the girl, and he hesitated for a fraction of a second, as though the sincerity in her attention gave him pause. Witnesses were called in succession. The local store owner recounted his experience, explaining how Rex had tracked down hidden items and assisted officers in apprehending the suspect. Each testimony built a picture of a community shaken but ultimately protected by law enforcement. Yet, the emotional heart of the courtroom remained centered on the child and the dog. Journalists scribbled notes, describing the girl's unwavering focus on Rex and her subtle gestures of recognition, tiny nods, small smiles, and the occasional whisper to her mother. During a brief recess, the child was allowed to approach Rex once again under supervision. The dog lowered his head, sniffing her hand gently as she stroked his fur with quiet delight. Officers and court staff watched in silent admiration, noting the calmness Rex displayed even in such an unusual environment. It was a reminder that courage could come in many forms, not only from trained service animals, but also from those who are small, vulnerable, and unassuming. As the courtroom reconvened, the prosecutor decided to illustrate Rex's training further. A demonstration was planned to show the jury how the dog could detect specific scents and respond to subtle human cues. The handler knelt beside Rex, instructing him quietly, and the girl's gaze followed every movement. She watched the dog obey with precision, and her small hands clutched her mother's tightly. It was clear she was absorbing the demonstration with curiosity and admiration. Her expression conveyed more understanding than many adults in the room expected from someone of her age. The moment the demonstration ended, a hush fell over the room. The jurors exchanged looks of wonder, the reporters paused their typing, and even the suspect's eyes lingered on Rex with a mixture of respect and unease. The girl, emboldened by her interaction with the dog, began whispering to her mother. Words were not fully audible, but her excitement and earnest gestures did not go unnoticed. The bond formed in these quiet, intimate moments was powerful, a reminder that empathy and trust could transcend age, size, and circumstance. The prosecution then called an expert witness, a K-9 trainer who explained in detail the significance of Rex's behavior. He noted, dogs like Rex do more than detect items or track criminals. They sense emotion, fear, and stress. They respond to innocence, to sincerity, and sometimes even to the courage we don't realize exists in the youngest among us. The jury listened intently, but all eyes, even the experts at times, were drawn to the little girl. Her silent acknowledgement of Rex's presence seemed to confirm everything he was saying, as if the child herself embodied the very concept of trust and courage he described. Throughout the morning, the trial unfolded with meticulous attention to detail. Evidence was presented, witnesses were questioned, and both prosecution and defense made their arguments. Yet, despite the legal proceedings, the focus of the courtroom subtly shifted. The girl's connection to Rex, the way she watched him, interacted with him, and responded to his calm presence, became the emotional core of the room. Even the judge, who had presided over countless cases, found his stern expression softened as he observed her quiet bravery. By midday, the gallery was silent, watching the interaction with rapt attention. The reporters leaned forward, their pens moving quickly, trying to capture not only the facts of the case but the extraordinary dynamic unfolding before them. The officers glanced at each other, recognizing that this moment, the connection between a 3-year-old and a trained police dog, was something rare, something that would be remembered long after the trial ended. And in the quiet spaces between testimonies, the girl continued to watch Rex, her eyes wide and curious, her fingers occasionally brushing the dog's fur. Her small gestures, an affectionate pat, a quiet giggle, a subtle nod, conveyed understanding, empathy, and a budding sense of courage. She was not just an observer of the courtroom drama. She was becoming a participant in the story of protection, bravery, and trust. By the time the afternoon recess was called, it was clear to everyone present that this trial would be remembered not only for its legal outcomes, but for the extraordinary bond forming between innocence and duty. The little girl had shown, in her silent attentiveness and subtle interactions, that courage and perception were not measured by age. And Rex, calm and attentive, remained a steadfast guardian, embodying the quiet power of protection and empathy that would soon captivate the entire courtroom. The courtroom had settled into a rhythm by late morning. The serious cadence of legal arguments, witness testimonies, and evidence presentations continued, but there was an undercurrent of something unusual, a quiet, invisible thread connecting a 3-year-old girl and a German shepherd named Rex. The momentary pause during recess had allowed this connection to deepen, and those who noticed it could feel the shift in the room's energy. The air was still tense with the gravity of the trial, but there was now an undertone of warmth, curiosity, and silent wonder. The girl's mother whispered gently, leaning down to her daughter, "Go ahead, you can go see him." Her words were soft, almost a suggestion, but they held immense trust. The child hesitated for a heartbeat, unsure how the adults in the room would react, but then her eyes found Rex's calm, intelligent gaze. Something clicked, a recognition, a bond that needed no explanation. Tiny fingers stretched toward the dog, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear as she stepped closer. Rex, trained for years to detect danger, theft, and even the subtlest signs of distress, reacted instinctively. He lowered his massive head, ears softening and tail moving in a controlled, deliberate wag. His amber eyes locked with the girl's, assessing her intentions. She radiated no fear, only curiosity, respect, and the kind of innocence that made him pause, a sensation he had not felt in months, if not years of service. The handler knelt nearby, ready to intervene if necessary, but he sensed that this was no ordinary interaction. This was something extraordinary. The gallery, once focused solely on the case, began to notice the interaction. Jurors whispered softly, trying to suppress smiles. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Even the officers, hardened by years on the force, exchanged glances. It was rare to witness such an unspoken connection between a young child and a police dog. It wasn't just cute or heartwarming, it was profound. There was an understanding being communicated without words, a recognition of trust and empathy that transcended human language. The girl's tiny hand reached out to stroke Rex's thick coat. The sensation of the dog's fur beneath her fingers seemed to embolden her, and she giggled quietly, a sound so delicate it momentarily dissolved the courtroom's tension. Rex responded by nudging her hand gently with his nose, acknowledging her touch. It was a mutual recognition, a silent agreement that no harm would come, and that a bond had formed. The handler, an experienced officer named Daniel Marks, watched closely. "Rex is responding to her presence differently than to anyone else," he whispered to the mother. "He senses her innocence and he's recognizing it. Watch how he mirrors her energy, calm, curious, gentle. He's never done this in a courtroom before." The mother nodded, feeling a wave of relief and pride. Her daughter, so small and vulnerable, had formed a connection that transcended fear, law, and circumstance. The girl, encouraged by Rex's calm acceptance, began to explore the boundaries of their interaction. She leaned closer, placing her small palm on his head, feeling the warmth of his fur and the rhythm of his breathing. The dog's ears flicked slightly, but he did not flinch. Instead, he lowered himself slightly, bringing his head closer to the girl's level, as if to invite more interaction. The child's laughter, quiet but genuine, echoed softly, drawing smiles even from the stern judge presiding over the case. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. "Look at her, she's fearless. The dog seems to understand her. It's like they're communicating silently." The audience was captivated, sensing that this wasn't just a child playing with a dog. It was a moment that carried emotional gravity, a lesson in trust, courage, and empathy delivered in real time. Even the defense attorney, Robert Hayes, who had been meticulous in controlling the courtroom's perception, found himself distracted. He noticed the subtle changes in the jury's demeanor. Their focus, once solely on legal arguments, had shifted slightly to the extraordinary bond forming before them. He realized that, while the law might dictate the outcome, human hearts were already being influenced by the display of innocence and trust. The girl, emboldened further, began to speak in whispers to Rex, her tiny voice barely audible over the low hum of the courtroom. Words weren't necessary. Her tone, gestures, and the soft tilt of her head conveyed understanding. Rex responded with slight movements, shifting his massive frame to remain close and attentive, acknowledging her presence as if he understood her entirely. The handler remained vigilant but knew instinctively that nothing would disrupt this rare connection. Time seemed to stretch. The trial's procedural rhythm continued around them, but the girl and Rex were in their own world. Observers noticed her mimic subtle movements the dog made, raising a hand when he tilted his head, tilting her own head when he responded. It was as if she were learning from him and he, in turn, was calibrating his behavior to hers. There was no tension between them, no misunderstanding, only a delicate equilibrium that spoke volumes. Journalists scribbled notes, sensing that this would become the most memorable aspect of the trial. Photographers discreetly captured images, trying to preserve the essence of the interaction without intruding. In hushed tones, spectators speculated about the significance. Could a child understand bravery at such a young age? Could a dog sense the purity of intention so clearly? The answers seemed evident in this silent communion between the two. The courtroom staff, officers, and jurors began to reflect on the deeper meaning of what they were witnessing. While the case itself was serious, a matter of stolen property and community safety, the emotional core had shifted. The child's innocence, her trust in the dog, and the dog's calm, protective presence reminded everyone that courage and understanding could exist in unexpected forms. Even those accustomed to the stark realities of law enforcement found themselves quietly moved. The judge, observing the connection, allowed a small smile to escape. He recognized that, beyond the evidence and testimonies, this was a moment worth noting. It demonstrated empathy, protection, and the silent wisdom a child could possess. The tiny figure before him, guided by instinct and curiosity, had already become the heart of the courtroom. Rex, steadfast and vigilant, remained the anchor of this extraordinary moment. As the girl gently stroked Rex's back, a wave of quiet realization swept through the courtroom. Adults, so accustomed to the rigidity of law and order, were reminded of simpler truths: trust, courage, empathy, and the power of connection. They saw that even in a formal setting, amidst serious allegations and legal complexities, innocence could assert itself with profound clarity. And in this bond between a child and a police dog, there was an unspoken lesson that resonated far beyond the walls of the courthouse. When the recess ended, the child reluctantly withdrew her hand from Rex, but the connection lingered in the room. The dog remained seated, alert yet calm, his presence a comforting force that continued to influence the mood of the courtroom. Officers straightened, jurors refocused, but the memory of the silent communion, the understanding exchanged without words, remained vivid. Everyone present understood that this bond was no ordinary display. It was a profound testament to empathy, courage, and trust. Even as the trial prepared to resume, whispers continued. "Did you see the way he responded to her? It's incredible, she's so small and yet so brave. This is going to be remembered for years." The girl, unaware of the significance, simply held her mother's hand, her mind filled with wonder and curiosity. And Rex, obedient and gentle, remained her steadfast companion, ready to offer protection and understanding in the moments to come. In that quiet interlude, the foundation was laid for the moment that would soon leave the courtroom in awe. The connection between innocence and courage, between child and dog, had been established, delicate yet powerful. It was a silent promise that even amidst legal proceedings, rules, and adult concerns, empathy and understanding could prevail, sometimes in the simplest gestures: a touch, a glance, a shared moment of trust. And as the judge called the court back to order, everyone knew, without saying it, that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The story of the 3-year-old girl and Rex was no longer just part of the trial. It was becoming the emotional heartbeat of the entire courtroom, capturing attention, hearts, and perhaps even changing the way people thought about courage, innocence, and the power of a single, silent connection. The courtroom had settled after the morning's tense proceedings and the quiet interlude of connection between the girl and Rex. The trial was back in session, but the energy had shifted subtly. Witnesses had testified, evidence had been reviewed, and even the defense and prosecution had paused to observe the extraordinary bond forming between the toddler and the police dog. All eyes, even those of seasoned officers and reporters, kept flicking toward the little girl. She sat upright now, small shoulders squared, her brown eyes fixed on Rex with an intensity that defied her age. The judge, noticing the unusual focus, allowed a demonstration of Rex's skills to illustrate his training to the jury. "This will help the members of the jury understand the work done by K-9 units," he explained, voice measured but tinged with curiosity. The handler, Officer Daniel Marks, stepped forward with quiet authority, kneeling beside Rex. Rex is trained not only to detect contraband and track suspects, but also to respond to human emotion, fear, distress, or even subtle signals from children, he explained. The girl leaned slightly forward on her mother's lap, tilting her head to watch Rex. Her small hands were clasped tightly together, her legs dangling but still, as if she sensed the importance of what was about to happen. Her attention never wavered. Her gaze followed Rex's every movement with the precision of someone who understood more than her years would suggest. Even the judge's stern demeanor softened as he observed her. Officer Marks instructed Rex to perform a simple demonstration of obedience and detection. The dog moved with exact precision, sniffing designated areas, identifying objects with practiced accuracy, and returning to the handler without hesitation. The jurors leaned forward, impressed by the dog's discipline. But all the attention wasn't on the mechanics of the demonstration, it was on the little girl. Each subtle movement of Rex drew a reaction from her. A small nod, a tilt of her head, a quiet gasp of delight. Then came the moment that would leave everyone in the courtroom breathless. The girl, encouraged by her mother and drawn by the calm presence of Rex, pointed a tiny finger at him. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried words that were simple yet profound. "He's a good dog. He keeps us safe." For a moment there was silence. The weight of her words seemed to press down on the room. Jurors blinked in surprise, officers froze mid-note, and reporters lowered their pens to capture the unexpected scene. The judge paused, gavel in hand, as if unsure how to respond. The entire courtroom, adults hardened by years of legal and police experience, was still. A single sentence from a 3-year-old had shifted the focus, commanding awe through its innocence and clarity. The words were simple, but their impact was enormous. "He's a good dog. He keeps us safe." In that brief statement, the child had expressed understanding, trust, and gratitude. She had recognized courage in a being far larger and more capable than herself, yet she spoke without fear. Her voice carried authority not from age or status, but from purity of perception. She had observed, she had felt, and she had communicated a truth that adults often overlooked. The courtroom reacted. Soft murmurs of admiration began to ripple through the gallery. The jurors exchanged glances, some smiling gently, others nodding in quiet acknowledgement. Reporters scribbled furiously, realizing that this small sentence would dominate headlines. Not the theft, not the trial, but the extraordinary observation of a 3-year-old and her connection with a police dog. Even the defense attorney, Robert Hayes, paused mid-note, glancing at the girl. His carefully constructed argument seemed suddenly less important compared to the weight of what had been spoken. He observed the way her words had captured attention, softened hearts, and reminded everyone present of the simple truths of courage and trust. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile, recognizing the power of innocence. Rex, for his part, responded to the girl's words with a subtle, almost imperceptible wag of his tail. He nudged her hand gently with his nose, as if acknowledging her compliment and reinforcing the bond they shared. The handler, Daniel Marks, allowed the moment to linger, recognizing that this interaction was no longer part of a demonstration. It was a real, emotional exchange that could not be replicated or rehearsed. The little girl's mother felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She squeezed her daughter's hand and whispered softly, "Yes, sweetie, he does keep us safe." The child smiled, a mixture of pride and joy as she observed Rex. Her simple words had transformed the mood of the room. Where there had been tension and anxiety, there was now warmth, hope, and a collective sense of wonder. The judge cleared his throat gently, regaining composure. "Well," he said, his voice carrying a note of respect, "that is certainly an insightful observation from our youngest participant today." A few people chuckled softly, but it was more a sound of awe than amusement. The room was aware that something extraordinary had occurred, a recognition that courage and understanding were not bound by age, and that innocence could communicate truths that adults sometimes failed to see. As the trial resumed, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Witnesses spoke, jurors listened, and evidence was presented, but the memory of the girl's words lingered like a soft hum beneath the formal proceedings. Each mention of Rex in subsequent testimonies brought the audience back to that remarkable moment, the acknowledgement of bravery and protection spoken by a child. Even the media in the room sensed the gravity of what had happened. Photographers snapped pictures discreetly, reporters scribbled notes feverishly, and some journalists whispered to one another about how this story would spread far beyond Willow Creek. The words, though few, carried the emotional weight of a story that transcended legalities and spoke to something more universal: trust, courage, and the bond between humans and animals. The suspect, watching quietly, seemed momentarily disarmed. His eyes, once filled with nervousness and defiance, softened as he observed the interaction. He may not have fully understood the significance, but he could not deny the quiet authority in the child's statement or the calming presence of the dog beside her. Even in the midst of a courtroom focused on law and evidence, there was recognition that something beyond procedural correctness had been witnessed, a moment of pure honesty and insight. By the end of the morning session, the story had already begun to take on a life of its own. Jurors discussed the child's words quietly among themselves, officers reflected on the significance of her courage, and reporters prepared to share an account that would capture hearts. The child had become more than a participant in the trial. She had become a symbol of trust, innocence, and the power of a single, heartfelt observation. As the courtroom recessed for lunch, the girl once again approached Rex under her mother's watchful eye. She knelt slightly to be closer to his level, patting him gently and speaking softly, though her words were now more personal. "Thank you for keeping us safe." Rex, patient and aware, rested his head near her shoulder, responding with a gentle nuzzle. The connection had deepened, reinforcing the message she had already delivered in the courtroom. Everyone present understood that the day would be remembered not for the legal arguments or the crime being tried, but for the astonishing moment when a 3-year-old spoke simple words that left the entire room in awe. Her observation, her courage, and her ability to recognize goodness and protection in a trained police dog had transcended age, circumstance, and expectation. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices can carry the loudest truths. By the time the session concluded for the day, the courtroom was quiet, reflective, and filled with a newfound sense of warmth. People had witnessed something extraordinary. A young child, guided by instinct and courage, speaking words that revealed clarity, empathy, and understanding beyond her years. Rex, ever vigilant, remained a steadfast symbol of protection, and the bond between the two had left an indelible mark on the hearts of all present. The courtroom had not been the same since the little girl spoke. Her simple words, "He's a good dog. He keeps us," in the air like a delicate chord, resonating with everyone present. Jurors sat in quiet reflection, the stern faces of officers softened, and reporters paused mid-note, realizing that this moment would be remembered far longer than the trial itself. The usual rhythm of court proceedings, the clicking of pens, the shuffling of papers, the measured voices of attorneys, was interrupted by an almost tangible wave of awe. Even the judge, who had presided over countless cases, looked down at the tiny figure before him with a mixture of admiration and wonder. He had been trained to remain impartial, to weigh evidence carefully, to keep emotion from affecting judgment. Yet here, He could not ignore the profound effect the child had on the entire courtroom. "Well," he murmured softly, almost to himself, "sometimes truth comes from the smallest voices." Officers stationed at the back of the room exchanged glances. They were accustomed to danger, to chaos, and to the hardened realities of law enforcement, but this connection between innocence and service was new. One officer whispered to another, "She's only 3, and yet she sees it, the bravery, the protection. I've never seen anything like it." They watched Rex, alert but calm, his gaze occasionally flicking toward the child as if confirming that he understood the weight of her words. The gallery, filled with townspeople, also reacted. Mothers glanced at their own children, thinking of the purity and clarity of perception that youth could bring. Fathers shifted in their seats, reminded of values that went beyond the legal proceedings. Even those who had been skeptical about the presence of a toddler in the courtroom were now moved, their doubts replaced by admiration. The emotional atmosphere was undeniable. Hearts were being captured quietly, one gentle word at a time. Reporters scribbled furiously, their notebooks capturing every nuance of the scene. Phones clicked softly as photographers attempted to preserve the delicate expressions of the girl and Rex. One journalist leaned over to a colleague, whispering, "This isn't just a courtroom story. It's something bigger. It's about trust, courage, and seeing the good in the world." Others nodded, their professional detachment challenged by the depth of human emotion unfolding before them. The defense attorney, Robert Hayes, cleared his throat, preparing to resume questioning, but he found himself hesitant. Words that once flowed easily now felt inadequate. The courtroom's focus had shifted. It was no longer just a legal proceeding. It had become a stage for an extraordinary human-animal connection. He realized that arguments and technicalities might matter less in the hearts of those witnessing the moment, compared to the purity and courage displayed by the child. The prosecution capitalized on the opportunity, reminding jurors of the bravery of Rex and the importance of law enforcement in protecting the community. But rather than sounding like rhetoric, their words were punctuated by the living example of courage and trust in the front row. The girl's presence lent authenticity to the arguments, reinforcing the idea that protection was not abstract. It had a face, a voice, and even pause. During a brief recess, the girl once again approached Rex. She knelt slightly, her tiny hands moving carefully over his thick coat. "You're my hero," she whispered, almost inaudible, but the words carried the weight of truth. Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle, placing his massive head near her shoulder. The handler, watching quietly, shook his head in wonder. He had trained Rex for years, seen him respond to fear, courage, and commands. But never had he witnessed a moment where a child's innate understanding commanded the dog's recognition so completely. The courtroom returned after the recess, and the mood had shifted subtly yet irrevocably. Jurors whispered to one another, recalling the girl's words and the way Rex responded. Officers straightened in their seats, smiling quietly at the simple yet profound lesson unfolding. Even the defense team seemed softened, understanding that no matter the outcome of the trial, the story of courage and trust they had witnessed could not be erased. Media attention intensified outside the courthouse. By early afternoon, reporters had begun to capture interviews and reactions. People described the girl's words as astonishing, inspiring, and even life-changing. Some locals reflected on their own childhoods, realizing that moments of clarity and courage often come unbidden from unexpected sources. Social media buzzed with accounts of the interaction, photos of the child and Rex circulating alongside headlines praising her insight. Meanwhile, the little girl remained composed, curious, and engaged. She continued to observe Rex's behavior closely, noticing subtle shifts in his stance, the way he followed her gaze, and the gentle wag of his tail. To her, this was not a performance. It was understanding, recognition, and perhaps even gratitude communicated between two beings who needed no translation. Each interaction, though quiet, reinforced the extraordinary bond she had established earlier in the day. Witnesses continued to testify, but the emotional focus of the courtroom had shifted. No longer were all eyes on the legal arguments. They were on the interaction between innocence and experience, youth and training, purity and duty. The trial's tension remained, but it was softened by a warmth that only such a rare, genuine connection could provide. Everyone present felt it, the unspoken lesson that courage, empathy, and trust could be recognized even in the youngest among us. During cross-examination, the prosecution highlighted Rex's training, his role in community safety, and the importance of K-9 units in law enforcement. But every mention of Rex elicited a reaction from the girl, a nod, a quiet smile, a small gesture of acknowledgement. These subtle cues reminded everyone that she was more than an observer. She was an active participant, engaging in the narrative of protection and trust. Her tiny presence gave weight to the testimony in a way that facts and statistics could not. By mid-afternoon, it was clear that the story unfolding in the courtroom would extend far beyond legal matters. Jurors reflected not only on evidence, but on the emotional resonance of the girl's words and Rex's response. Officers discussed the impact of seeing courage recognized by someone so young. Reporters prepared stories that emphasized not the crime, but the extraordinary display of empathy and trust. The moment had already captured hearts, and its ripple effect would extend far beyond the walls of the courthouse. Even the suspect, observing quietly from the defendant's seat, seemed affected. His previous nervousness and defiance were softened by the simple, undeniable truth of the child's words. He could not dismiss her observation nor ignore the bond between her and Rex. For a brief moment, he seemed to acknowledge something beyond guilt and innocence, a truth about protection, courage, and recognition that transcended legal arguments. As the day wore on, the courtroom continued its formal proceedings, but the energy had shifted irreversibly. The little girl, her tiny presence magnified by her interactions with Rex, had become the emotional heartbeat of the trial. The dog, calm and vigilant, remained by her side, a silent guardian and participant in a moment that none present would ever forget. When the session concluded for the day, the emotional weight of the morning and afternoon hung in the air. Jurors, officers, and townspeople alike filed out of the courtroom, quietly discussing the extraordinary words of a child and the remarkable bond with a police dog. Cameras and notepads recorded every detail, but it was the memory, the intangible connection, that left the deepest impression. In the hallway outside the courtroom, the girl once again approached Rex. She knelt to stroke his fur gently, whispering, "You're so brave." The dog leaned into her, attentive and calm, a silent acknowledgement that courage, protection, and understanding were mutual. The handler watched in awe, realizing that this moment, small, quiet, and seemingly ordinary, was a profound testament to the power of trust, empathy, and innocence. By the time they left the courthouse, the story had already begun to spread throughout Willow Creek. Neighbors spoke of it in hushed tones, praising the child's bravery and the dog's calm wisdom. Social media posts shared images of the interaction, emphasizing the child's words and the silent understanding between her and Rex. It was clear that what had happened that day would not be forgotten. It would be told and retold as a story of courage, trust, and the unexpected power of innocence. The courtroom had borne witness not only to the proceedings of a theft case, but to something far more significant, a moment of humanity, connection, and recognition that transcended age, size, and circumstance. The girl's words had captured the hearts of everyone present, and Rex's gentle response had reinforced the extraordinary nature of the bond. Together, they had reminded the world that bravery and understanding often come from the most unexpected sources, and that sometimes, a child and a dog can teach more about courage than any trial or testimony ever could. The courtroom was quiet, almost reverent as the trial neared its conclusion. The proceedings had been tense, detailed, and thorough, but something extraordinary had already taken place. The words of a 3-year-old, "He's a good dog. He keeps us safe," had shifted the emotional landscape of the room. Jurors, officers, and observers alike carried the weight of her observation in their minds. Even the suspect appeared subdued, aware, perhaps for the first time, of the profound truth expressed in that simple sentence. The jury filed back into the courtroom, their expressions serious but softer than earlier in the day. They carried with them not only the evidence but also the lingering impression of innocence and courage embodied by the child and Rex. The judge called the court to order, his voice steady yet warmer than usual. "Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict?" The foreperson rose, folding hands with a sense of gravity. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied. "We have." A hush fell over the room. The spectators leaned forward, sensing the significance of the moment, though many still held their minds on the extraordinary child and her interaction with Rex. The 3-year-old, seated with her mother, glanced up at the dog, her small eyes reflecting trust, curiosity, and anticipation. The verdict was read aloud. Guilty on the primary charge of theft, but with mitigating factors considered. The defendant would face community service and restitution, avoiding imprisonment due in part to cooperation and remorse. While the outcome reflected the law, the emotional impact of the child's presence and the dog's demonstration of calm courage had softened the room in a way no legal document ever could. After the verdict was delivered, the courtroom released a collective breath. The tension that had built over hours of testimony, evidence, and deliberation seemed to dissolve into quiet reflection. Jurors filed out slowly, still exchanging glances toward the girl and Rex. The little girl, sensing the conclusion, moved closer to the dog, brushing her tiny hands along his fur in a gesture of affection. The dog, ever patient, leaned into her touch, his amber eyes calm and alert. The judge allowed a brief moment of informal acknowledgement. "I would like to note," he said, his voice carrying a rare warmth, "the courage, innocence, and perceptiveness demonstrated by our youngest participant today. Her words, spoken with clarity and understanding, have reminded us all that insight does not require age, and courage can take many forms." A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the courtroom. The mother smiled, proud yet humbled, as her daughter whispered again to Rex, "Thank you for helping everyone." The dog responded with a gentle nuzzle, almost as if accepting gratitude in its own way. Observers were struck by the depth of their bond. It was more than companionship. It was a shared understanding of protection, trust, and empathy. The courtroom had witnessed not only legal proceedings but a profound lesson in humanity. Outside the courthouse, the story began to spread like wildfire. Reporters filed accounts, capturing both the factual details of the trial and the heartwarming story of a child, a police dog, and an extraordinary moment of recognition. Social media posts shared images of the girl and Rex, emphasizing the words that had left the room in awe. Headlines praised her courage, highlighting the way innocence and trust could impact even the most formal of settings. The officers who had worked closely with Rex reflected on the day with quiet reverence. "I've seen dogs respond to fear, to danger, to trained commands," one officer admitted to a colleague, "but I've never seen one respond to a child's understanding this way. She saw him, recognized him, and spoke what we all felt but couldn't say." Others nodded, agreeing that this small voice had left an indelible mark on their hearts and professional experience alike. In the days following the trial, the girl's words continued to resonate. Neighbors, friends, and local community members spoke of the courage of a child who could see beyond appearances, who recognized protection and bravery in a gentle, loving dog. The media coverage spread beyond Willow Creek, capturing the imagination of people nationwide. Children and parents alike were inspired by the story of a girl whose simple observation reminded the world that courage and trust often come in unexpected forms. Rex became a local hero, his actions celebrated not only for their practical impact but for their emotional resonance. The dog had demonstrated discipline, intelligence, and calm bravery, but it was his connection with the little girl that captured the imagination of the community. Their bond illustrated that trust is a powerful force, one that transcends age, species, and circumstance. The little girl herself remained unassuming, curious, and joyful. She continued to approach Rex whenever possible, her gestures gentle yet confident. Each interaction reinforced the lessons she had shared in the courtroom, the understanding of courage, the importance of protection, and the value of trust. The child's innocence and empathy had become a mirror, reflecting the qualities in others that are often overlooked: patience, respect, and recognition of goodness. In the weeks after the trial, the girl and Rex became symbols in Willow Creek. Schools invited local law enforcement to speak about the importance of K-9 units, using her story as an example of courage and understanding. Community events highlighted the bond between children and animals, emphasizing empathy, responsibility, and the quiet bravery that can manifest in the smallest of participants. The courtroom's awe had blossomed into a wider, community-wide celebration of innocence and trust. Even the defendant reflected on the impact of the day. Though he had been found guilty, he later expressed that witnessing the girl and Rex had left a profound impression. "I didn't realize," he admitted in a supervised interview, "how much courage and understanding could come from someone so small. She saw the truth in a way I couldn't. It changed the way I think about people and dogs and what it means to protect others." Meanwhile, the media continued to cover the story. Articles and interviews emphasized the quiet power of a 3-year-old, the intelligence and calm demeanor of a police dog, and the extraordinary interaction that had captured the hearts of all present. Photos circulated widely, showing the girl gently patting Rex's head, her eyes wide with admiration and understanding. People across the nation were captivated, inspired by the simple yet profound lesson in empathy and courage. Back in Willow Creek, the courtroom itself seemed transformed. Though the legal proceedings were routine in their outcome, the memories of that day, the girl's words, Rex's calm responses, and the shared connection, lingered. Officers, judges, and residents spoke about it long afterward, often recalling the quiet strength of a child who could see truth in a way that adults sometimes overlook. The little girl continued to grow, but the memory of Rex and their courtroom experience remained vivid. The bond they formed demonstrated that trust, empathy, and bravery are qualities that can be recognized in all beings, regardless of age. The courtroom had been a place of law, but it had also become a space where lessons in courage, understanding, and humanity were quietly taught by a small voice and a devoted dog. By the time the trial concluded fully, the story had taken on a life of its own. Newspapers recounted it for weeks, local television ran segments highlighting the girl's words, and residents spoke of the lesson she imparted. The extraordinary bond between child and dog became a symbol, a reminder that sometimes the smallest participants can teach the biggest lessons, and that courage, trust, and empathy are qualities that endure long after the gavel falls. The weeks following the trial were a whirlwind of attention, admiration, and quiet reflection for the people of Willow Creek. The 3-year-old girl and Rex had become more than participants in a courtroom drama. They had become symbols of courage, trust, and the extraordinary power of connection. Across the town, conversations no longer revolved solely around the theft case, but also about the remarkable bond between a small child and a police dog, and the awe-inspiring words she had spoken that had captured the hearts of everyone in the courtroom. At home, the girl's mother watched her daughter with a sense of pride and amazement. The child had always been curious and perceptive, but the way she had engaged with Rex in the courtroom revealed an understanding far beyond her years. "You made everyone see what bravery really looks like," her mother whispered one afternoon, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's forehead. The little girl smiled softly, her eyes still reflecting the quiet intensity that had made her courtroom observations so profound. Rex, for his part, remained a constant presence in her life. Though he returned to regular duty with the police department, he had formed a bond with the child that could not be broken. Whenever the girl visited the station or attended community events, Rex would approach her with calm recognition, nudging her gently and lowering his head in the familiar way that had first drawn the attention of the courtroom. Their connection was mutual, unspoken, yet deeply understood. The story of the girl and Rex began to spread far beyond Willow Creek. Local news outlets featured interviews with the girl's mother and Officer Daniel Marks, highlighting the extraordinary bond and the impact of her words. Social media posts went viral, with viewers across the country expressing admiration for the child's courage and insight. Many were moved not only by the interaction itself, but by the reminder that wisdom and bravery are not measured by age. Schools in Willow Creek began incorporating the story into lessons on empathy, responsibility, and community service. Teachers recounted the courtroom incident, emphasizing how a small voice, speaking the truth with sincerity, could influence and inspire others. Children were encouraged to notice the good in the people and animals around them, to trust their instincts, and to recognize bravery wherever it existed. The courtroom moment had become a teaching tool, reminding the community of the value of observation, courage, and kindness. Officer Marks continued to speak publicly about Rex's training and the importance of K-9 units, often highlighting the girl's interaction as an example of the emotional intelligence that dogs can sense and respond to. Rex responded not just to commands but to trust, he explained during one interview. And what he responded to most profoundly was innocence and understanding. That child saw him in a way that reminded all of us why we do this work, why we train, and why we serve. His words resonated widely, reinforcing the human-animal bond and inspiring respect for both service animals and the people who work alongside them. The community also began organizing events to celebrate the lessons learned from the courtroom story. Local gatherings highlighted K-9 demonstrations, child safety workshops, and community engagement programs. The little girl, though shy, occasionally attended these events with her mother, always accompanied by Rex. Observers noted her quiet confidence, the way she interacted with Rex, and the gentle authority in her demeanor. She remained small in stature, but enormous in the impact she left on those around her. As months passed, the girl's story became a symbol of inspiration for many. Parents spoke to their children about her courage, police officers shared it during training sessions, and community leaders referenced it in speeches about empathy and civic responsibility. It was a reminder that courage could take many forms, and that trust and recognition could be expressed even in a quiet, 3-year-old voice. Even the defendant, who had been found guilty of theft, reportedly reflected on the experience with humility. Conversations with his probation officer revealed that witnessing the girl's bravery and Rex's calm response had left a lasting impression on him. Though he faced consequences for his actions, the encounter provided him with an unexpected lesson in empathy, understanding, and the profound effect of small yet meaningful gestures. The girl continued to grow, her bond with Rex deepening over time. Each interaction reinforced the lessons she had imparted during the trial, that courage could be recognized in quiet moments, that trust was a powerful force, and that understanding could exist even between species. To the townspeople who watched, this bond became a living example of hope and resilience, a reminder that bravery often appears in subtle, unexpected forms. The courthouse itself became a quiet symbol of this extraordinary story. Visitors, jurors, and staff often recalled the day when a child and a dog had captivated an entire courtroom. Officers reflected on the emotional depth of their work, recognizing that protecting the community was about more than enforcing rules. It was about nurturing trust, understanding, and the relationships that defined a safer, more compassionate society. Years later, the story of the 3-year-old and Rex was recounted in books, local news retrospectives, and community workshops. The girl, now older, would occasionally be interviewed, her words still carrying the same honesty and insight that had first left the courtroom in awe. Rex, by her side, remained a symbol of loyalty, bravery, and the extraordinary power of the human-animal connection. Together, they reminded people that the smallest voices can have the greatest impact. In Willow Creek, the lessons endured. Children were taught to recognize courage in themselves and others. Adults were reminded to value empathy, patience, and observation. The girl's words, once spoken softly to a police dog, had rippled outward, leaving a legacy that went far beyond the courtroom, a testament to the enduring power of trust, the quiet strength of innocence, and the bonds that can form when compassion meets courage. The final scene, often remembered by those present at the trial, was quiet, yet infinitely powerful. The little girl kneeling beside Rex, her small hand brushing his fur, whispering her simple, heartfelt words of recognition and gratitude. The dog, calm and patient, acknowledged her presence with gentle nudges and attentive eyes. It was a moment of connection that transcended the proceedings of the day, teaching everyone who witnessed it that bravery, trust, and love do not depend on age or circumstance. They exist wherever hearts are open to them. And so, the story ended not with the conclusion of a trial, but with the beginning of something far greater. A lasting reminder that courage is often quiet, trust is profoundly powerful, and even the smallest voice can leave a mark that resonates for generations. The girl and Rex continued their lives, bound not only by circumstance but by understanding, loyalty, and a shared sense of purpose. A story that would never be forgotten, a lesson that would continue to inspire.